all these influencers who are telling us how to go from 0 to 1,000 people on their mailing list in a week. How are they doing it?
Being a fractional executive is like having a team of Avengers. AI should be your sidekick. It's not gonna replace your job.
A lot of times brands feel like, oh, let's do an event and build a community.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't think that works, right?
Building a community, it takes consistency and it takes meaningful interaction.
Growth is a strategic journey, not a magic spell.
So when they said it didn't work, that's because it's like set it and forget it campaign.
How do we teach people to make sure that they can be AI proof?
I like that, AI proof.
Hi, Finia.
Hi, Sana.
I'm going to dive right in, and I want to talk about something that's been on everybody's mind in terms of how fast everything is changing. And it looks like the marketing playbook that everybody was following is becoming obsolete. So tell me a little bit about what's happening in the marketing landscape. What are you seeing? Is AI going to eat away all our jobs? What's happening?
Yeah. So I think that's a very relevant question, Sana, because, we have this, I guess, huge technological shift and also like cultural shift, right? And the consumer behavior changes, adapting to that technology and cultural shifts. So when you say the marketing playbook is obsolete, that's because we don't know how we can adapt to the consumer behavior. So I think that's basically our challenge right now as like marketing leaders and like marketing teams.
Right.
So the way I see it is, companies who adapt to these changes, like with the AI trends that is happening right now, what are we doing about it? Like, how can we pivot our strategy, our marketing strategy, so we can outreach the segment that we want, or we can, sell our product and services to the consumer, right? So I think it's just a matter of, being adaptable to the way the consumer is making buying decisions or making purchase behavior.
Right. And what would be the most important changes that you're seeing?
The most important changes is the strategy that, okay, when you have, let's say, social media used to be, one of the key channels for you to sell something very quick, right? And this usually happens in the e-commerce, fashion, and beauty industry, right? But when you, let's say, think about B2B companies, social media is a channel where you actually building that demand. It's not a channel for you to capture demand. So I think there's a lot of like, I guess, misconception in a way that how do you create or how do you develop the marketing strategy so you can actually reach out your type of customer, your ideal customer profile. So it's not saying that, okay, this strategy worked before, and if we do it now, it should work again. It's never like that.
Yeah. One of the challenges as a marketing leader, I've been a VP of marketing as well. We know that every time we want to do something different or we want to do something new, we have to justify the ROI. And it's not easy.
Yeah.
And now with all of the things changing in terms of AI, consumer behavior, like you said, with so much changing so fast, if a marketing leader really wants to deliver, they have to change the way they work.
Right.
Which means they have to convince leadership of the changes that they're making and also convince them that there's an ROI.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, or what would you suggest? How should marketing leaders navigate that challenge? How does one convince the leadership of why that change is important and what the ROI is going to be?
Yeah. So I guess one of the key challenge that I've seen also like in talking to like peers in the industry is that they cannot justify their marketing programs or their marketing initiatives or their campaigns to the C-level or the senior leadership, right? And one of those key challenges is actually not talking their language. What I mean is, okay, we can say, hey boss, our social media campaign reached out to 1 million people. And he would go back and ask you, so what, right? Because there's no value in reaching out 1 million people if we cannot connect that to like how our sales are generating. Like, what does it do to our GMV, for example? So I think the key is for marketing leaders to be able to translate that, translate all the marketing campaigns that you do or the marketing programs that you have into the financial terms. Like, because at the end of the day, right, you have marketing team sits in the company because marketing team can support the overall business goal, which is like sales, revenue, and so on. So we really need to make sure that whatever we do within the marketing context, that helps contribute to the overall growth, which is like sales and revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the other changes that we're also seeing is in terms of the kind of roles that are coming up, one being a fractional role.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a few months since you joined Livit as their fractional CMO. Tell me a little bit about one. Let's just start with, what does a fractional CMO do? What does it even mean?
So fractional is like expert in demand, right? I remember my former boss in Happy Fresh. He told me that being a fractional executive is like having a team of Avengers, sorry, because you have different specialties. This very seasoned domain experts working together in a company to achieve something, right? To achieve the business goal. So it's basically, going into a strategic leadership, but having a part-time commitment. But you are still integrated within the team. So basically, all that you need to focus on is basically directions and strategy on how we can achieve the business goal. On the execution side, you should leave it to the internal team to do it, to execute. So it really like gives you a sense of the iceberg view, very much compared to, let's say, if I'm a full-time head of marketing, because then without you being realized, and I've experienced this so many times, I went into the deep weep, like executing as well, which is not the purpose of you being in that team.
Yeah. And I mean, part-time roles have always been around. They're not new, but we're now seeing them at executive levels.
Yes.
Right? And you explained why that is. But I want to understand, what do you think triggered that shift where demand for executive fractional roles has increased? Do you think there's a reason why that happened?
I think, first of all, the industry and the business, I guess, the business strategy is getting dynamic and more complex than ever before. So companies need executives with, like seasoned expertise in specialized areas or skill set, right? But they might not need it for like the longer term or like the full-time, engagement, right? So and it's very different than consultancy, because a lot of people asking me also, what's the difference between fractional and consultancy, right?
Yeah.
Consultancy, all like the main deliverable that you do or you give to the companies is in the terms of recommendation, or like slides, next action, what you do, but you don't actually get involved into doing and executing that with the team. In fractional role, you are actually doing that. So you are not only giving recommendation and next action, but you are embedded in the team to see whether that recommendation works or not.
So does that mean that the fractional role comes with more accountability or responsibility?
Yes, correct.
Compared to consultant who's generally just recommending, and then it's
Right.
up to you
Yeah.
to decide whether you want to take it on.
Exactly like that. Yeah.
Or not. Before you joined Livit as a fractional CMO, you were working as the head of growth or VP of growth at Pintar, and then also as VP of marketing at Xendit, which means that you were looking at a lot of different things within marketing. So there's community, there's partnerships, there's performance marketing, there's all these things. Can you help me understand how each of these different components form the marketing function? Where do they fit into the marketing funnel? Can you walk me through that? Like, what's the role of community? And we're going to do a deeper dive into community because I think that's very relevant today. But but there's so many different things in marketing. It's not as simple as it used to be a few years ago. What are the different types of activities within marketing today? and how do they fit into that marketing funnel?
Yeah. So basically, the way I see it is always like marketing as a cohesive strategy, right? It's not only like running performance marketing or like Google Ads, Meta Ads, and so on, but it's a cohesive program or a cohesive initiative where you actually do a lot of different things like social media, content marketing, SEO, and so on, and bring that together to achieve that one goal. And usually it's like leads, or qualified leads to the sales. People call it marketing qualified leads, which for me is, it's the same with like sales qualified leads should be. But that's basically how I see marketing. So doing different things is very different to different companies. So for example, at Pintar, as an example, what worked for us is basically referral, Google Ads, and social media. We try different channels already. It didn't work, and we validate that experiments. So that's why we went with those three. And the results actually validating that findings that we did beforehand. So it's really like depends on different type of industry and different companies. It's not one size fits all.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think I read in one of your posts you mentioned that growth is a strategic journey, not a magic spell.
Yes.
I think
definitely.
And when I was thinking of our conversation, one of the things that came to mind was that there are a lot of growth related roles that we see today.
Yes.
But every time I speak to somebody, their explanation of what that is or their understanding of what that is, even as an employer, is very different in terms of what does growth really mean? Like, what are you looking for? Do you mean performance marketing? Is it something else? What's your definition of growth, or what were you doing as a VP of growth? Like, what is your definition of growth?
Yeah. So the definition of growth based on my experience, basically having this specialized team, which includes marketing specialists, right, with different function like social media, community, and so on, to actually achieve that business goal. So you can name it marketing manager. You can name it also growth manager, actually. But the type of activities that is very different than like marketing in traditional sense is that in growth, you need to validate your learnings, and you need to know whether you need to pivot the current strategy or you need to continue, right? So it's very data driven compared to, let's say, marketing in traditional sense, because then you will have maybe like social media, which is not which is not always having attributes to that, or like building community. You cannot really attribute having a community into the business goals, right? So that's the way I see it in terms of like between growth marketing and just regular marketing.
And I think because you talked about data and you talked about attribution, I think a lot of founders and startups today are talking about user acquisition, and customer acquisition. I think let's start with, what does it mean? What does customer acquisition mean? What are the different channels for customer acquisition? How do they, because you also mentioned that it's not a one size fits all.
Right.
So what are the different channels that startups can explore depending on the kind of business that they're doing? And then I think the most important one is, how do you optimize your customer acquisition cost while also increasing conversion?
Right. Yeah. So basically,
I think that's a lot of questions.
It is. Let me try to answer one by one. So basically, customer acquisition is how much money you spend to acquire one new customer. As simple as that, right? And you can do this through so many channels, actually. For example, I've had worked with this company, which is an online coffee subscription company back in the day, where we only use social media and email marketing. We didn't have any budget for ads or anything like that. And it worked for them, right? Because that's where the customer are. But let's say if I reflect on my experience at Xendit or Pintar, it's a different product, right? So the channel of acquisition also different very much. So I think how you can actually maximize the CAC is, you need to really look into your existing data. What's been happening, what's been running, how much budget are you spending, And out of the budget that you're spending, is it, giving you, let's say, qualified leads? Is it giving you enough revenue to support that and having, like a healthy ROI? So I think looking back into your existing data and evaluate them, and then, pivot your strategy is really important as a marketing leader. Gotcha. So how do you maximize CAC? And I've seen this so many times. It's really simply going back to your messaging and how do you position yourself as, as a product or as a service. And, I've worked with different clients in different industry. And at the end of the day, what we did is basically change the messaging, making sure the CTA is, right on point. And it helps also to basically know how your buyer is buying your product. Are they going from, I don't know, community? Are they discovering you from like search result, right? So there are many different things that you can do to maximize that, but having the right user journey in your website and making sure your messaging is on point also helps the conversion.
Right. Would you be comfortable sharing an example of a campaign that you might have designed? And you can take a minute to think about it if you want.
Sure.
But can you think of a campaign that you ran for customer acquisition or an experiment? Like you said, you have to validate different experiments and see what works for you. Can you think of something that you worked on where you had to pivot your strategy and then you figured, oh, these are interesting insights that you've learned?
Yeah. So maybe a good example would be from Pintar, because at that time we spent some budget on Google Ads, and we also did social media, and we also having running events. But one thing that I was really curious at that time, they said, so this is like, because I went there and we have like the legacy team running the marketing. So I asked them, right, what about referral? Have you tried referral before? Because this is the time where we need to acquire new students for one of our programs, right? And they said, oh, we did that before and didn't work. How did you do it, right? So I went in again, actually experimenting again with referral program, because they said it didn't work. We ran it for 3 months, and in result, we managed to get 34% out of that campaign for new students. So when they said it didn't work, that's because it's like set it and forget it campaign. That's the way they see it. But for me, right, when you do referral, you have to be consistent in terms of, sending out email, touching base with the current students, because they are your advocates to get those new students, right? And actually, it actually validated our hypothesis in the beginning that it should work if we do it this way. And if we give them also like some small incentive, meaning like a discount on the first month and things like that. So that's one of the way that by experimenting in small scale, and then when this thing actually works, then you can run it.
Yeah. That's pretty cool, actually. You also mentioned events in your answer. And something that I am curious about is, of course, when we look around today, there's a lot of brands that are now trying to leverage community.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. And I think you've been building community before it was cool. So I have a lot of questions when it comes to community, but the first thing, because you mentioned events, that came to my mind was, a lot of times brands feel like, oh, let's do an event and build a community.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think that works, right? With one event, it doesn't work.
Of course not. Yeah.
What do you think about that? What does it take to build community? What does a good event for community building look like? Or even a good event strategy for community building looks like? And then again, no one size fits all, right? Because are you B2B? Are you B2C? What do you sell?
Yeah.
But I want to hear your thoughts on community building and events in particular.
Yeah, this is very interesting because I've experienced this like so many times with Girls in Tech in the past, and now with Ladies in Tech. So I think many companies didn't think enough or didn't have a good strategy on how to build a community, because building a community, it takes consistency and it takes meaningful interaction, right? What does that means is like you need to show up every day. Let's say if I have, so at Ladies in Tech, we have WhatsApp group and we also have our email newsletter. But in WhatsApp group, we can interact every day, right? And you do need to do that to manage, to foster the engagement within the community. And I think a lot of companies only think of community as a short-term strategy, because there's been a lot of like, I guess a lot of requests coming in and say, hey, you want to do this for like 1 or 2 months and that's it, right? You don't, if you're thinking of building a community, then you have to think long term. You cannot think short term.
Yeah. And are there any interesting insights? What worked for you when you were building a community with, let's say, women in tech or ladies in tech? What have been your learnings? What works? What doesn't work? Because I think building a community, like you said, it takes time, but it also takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
In terms of curating those meaningful conversations,
Right.
one, without spamming your community. So also making sure that there's just the right amount and kind of conversations happening to keep the community engaged and also to deliver value, right? I think that's a very key point that we've sort of missed every time we're talking about community. We want a lot of people at our events not thinking what is the value that they get out of it, right?
Exactly.
As a brand, we're seeing, we can see value in building community, but I think what value we're delivering, I think that's also important. So what are your insights from building community over all these years? What has worked? What doesn't work? What are the different components of building community? And any advice that you have for brands that now want to build their own communities?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest learnings from building community. So I actually joined 2007 with Girls in Tech previously. Wow. And 2017, I was a volunteer. And then 2019, I just started co-MD the program, right? So it's been 5 years building the community. And what has worked for us is having that separate, channel where there are people who just want to participate on our activities on a monthly basis, right? So we have this email newsletter and we have the WhatsApp group for people who wants to like join the group, right? So we've tried Discord, we've tried Telegram, we tried all different channels to actually activate this community, like having the channel or having the avenue to just share everything and, interacting. But WhatsApp group worked for us and email newsletter worked for us. Why? Because from email newsletter, that's where our participation for events coming from. Right. So we have a very active members in the email newsletter, because our open rate and our clicks is around 25%. So if I say I'm going to have an event next week and I'm just going to use email marketing to invite the community members, it will work. Like we don't really have social media that active, but people will definitely join from the email newsletter, because we only send out our email newsletter once a month with very relevant information and activities that they can participate and things like that. So in the past, we used to send out email every like 2 weeks and stuff, and no one is like, our unsubscription rate at that time was like 50%.
Oh wow.
So we were like, what's going
That's
on?
A lot.
Yeah. And that's how we learn. Yeah. And right now, what we do every quarter, we send out survey, just a 3-question survey. That's where the pulse check is. We know what they want. We know, let's say this year, we know a lot of people are very worried about AI. That's why we came up with different classes and different talk show and different, webinars about AI.
Right.
So we listen to our community members and we take that feedback and, throw it into our program.
Yeah. I think something that I've noticed in your conversation is it seems like you're big on experimenting and learning from it.
You have to.
Right?
Yeah.
But like you said, to do an experiment, you need a hypothesis of, I think this is going to work. What I'm interested in figuring out is, how do you build that hypothesis? How do you know if it might work? And what is good enough information for you to say, I think it might work and I'm confident enough to give it a shot?
Yeah.
And then be okay with if it doesn't work.
Right.
But how do you build that hypothesis?
So how do you build that hypothesis is basically, once if you have existing data, then you can just look at your data now and, why is this like this, right? But if you are starting something new, you don't know whether it's going to work or not. You still have to make bets, right? And usually this kind of hypothesis, I don't decide it by myself. I decided with my team. What's your confidence level? What's makes sense for us to actually say this is successful or not? And this is usually like multiple stakeholder conversation, but it's a very async conversation because we want to test it really fast. And usually the way that I experiment things, I took maybe 1 or 2 weeks to experiment this, because I know, okay, if we do it online, it's probably faster. Like we can see the result faster. Or if we have to do it like offline, then we should have maybe like 2 weeks to see whether the result is coming in or not. Right? So we basically decide together with the team what makes sense for us.
Right. And you mentioned data. What are some data points, or what are some questions? I think there's also this challenge of, sometimes we have the data, we just don't know what questions to ask when we're looking at that data.
True.
So what are those questions that you're asking? What is that data that you're looking at? Which is helping you then determine your hypothesis or how confident you can be about it.
Yeah. So it goes back to, what are your goals, right? Like, why do we want to run this experiment? I can give an example from our scholarship admission, because at that time we had a very interesting workflow where, okay, the awardees are like the potential awardees. They can fill in the data and then submit a video and then go through the stage of interviews, right? The first 1 week, only 5 people applied. And we only have 3 weeks to go to basically reach out 300 applicants, right? And looking at this, we know, okay, for sure, we need to change something. So I work together with our volunteers, our advisory board members as well, and figure out, okay, what is our hypothesis? And our hypothesis is that we need to change the flow of the admission. So what we did was, on the second week, potential awardees, they can just fill in the data and then go through the logic test, because then we know, in terms of technical skill set, they have, like a higher score or not, right? And then we'll do the videos and all that other thing after the interviews. And it worked. On the second week and the third week, we actually reached 330 applicants.
Wow.
So that's a very simple, example on how you need to see, how you can build your own hypothesis, right? Based on your existing data. Or if you try something new, then you can just decide together, okay, what makes sense for us?
I think another interesting thing is also, every time we're looking for a solution to a problem, we try and think of something really complex.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And the examples that you're giving, they're not rocket science. It's just sometimes it's right in front of you.
But people don't
it
see it.
feels like, oh, that's simple.
Yeah.
We don't want to do this. So I think it doesn't have to be a fancy solution. Sometimes basically what you're saying is, you saw there was friction probably in your process,
right,
and you needed to remove that friction somehow. So that's cool. Another thing, when you were talking about the newsletter, because you said that you get a lot of your interest in events through your newsletter.
Yeah.
But I think a more important question is, how do you get people to be on your mailing list, right? So how do you get to the point where you can then rely on your newsletter?
So this was actually our legacy program. So we used to have a lot of like activities. Almost every week we have, offline activities, meetup, webinars, all the different things. And every single event, we always ask them, would you be willing to be included in the email newsletter, right? And I think majority opt in to our email newsletter. That's why we have that I guess, member base. And, going through like 5 years, now we have about 3,000 members. Yeah, again, with like 40% active, we can say active members because they're always participating in our survey. They're always like, participating in our events and stuff. So I think that's pretty good numbers.
And so what I'm hearing is that, of course, it takes a lot of work
Yeah, of course.
and effort
Yes,
and delivering
definitely.
value.
Yeah.
So what do you think about all these influencers who are telling us how to go from 0 to 1,000 people on their mailing list in a week? How are they doing it?
I guess it's a different context in the sense that they're probably like solopreneurs, right? Selling their courses usually, but they have already I guess a big follower base. So
Right.
that works with them, right?
Yeah.
Because they already have a big follower base. It's easy for them to invite them to like exclusive newsletter.
Yeah.
But for us, since we're building it from scratch, we did a lot of testing and learning and testing and learning. Even until now,
Yeah.
we still iterate.
Yeah, I think that's extremely important. It's something that I talk about very frequently as well, which is when somebody says that I did something in a week or a month, there's usually years of work before that
exactly.
that is not being highlighted. Right?
True.
So
Yeah.
I think that it also sets the wrong expectation. So, which is probably why when brands come and they want to build a community or they want to launch a podcast or they
Yeah.
want to launch a newsletter, they're like, can we get 1 million views in like X
Exactly.
number of days?
Yeah.
Right.
A lot
And I
of
think
them, yeah.
partially that expectation probably comes from seeing others tell them that, we did it in a month and we
Right.
did it in 2 months or 6 months or whatever. I think let's address the elephant in the room, which is AI.
AI.
Right. Before we were having this conversation, we came to the conclusion that AI is not taking our jobs.
It's
yet.
not.
Yet.
I don't think it's
Ever?
Nah, I mean, yeah.
Okay. But one, I want to talk about how is AI changing things for marketing in terms of channels, in terms of timelines, whatever, right? And then also from the perspective of marketing skills, how do we need to adapt to what AI is doing to the work?
Yeah. I think when you're talking about AI, definitely it has been transformative towards marketing roles. A lot of people are, they are afraid because content writing, you can just do it with AI, right? Video edits, you can just do it with AI. So you don't need to hire like designers or content writer and so on. But for me, right, after, I guess, because I'm quite FOMO when there's like new tools coming out, especially for like marketing, right? I always try to take a test and see like what is the capability of these tools. And at the end of the day, I guess my key learning is that AI should be your sidekick. It's not gonna replace your job. It might replace your job if you are not adaptive enough in using or leveraging AI to help with your work, right? So I use a lot of AI tools on my daily basis to brainstorm ideas, to structure my slides, but the main creativity, the main intuition, what you want to come out of it is actually from yourself, right? So if you say that, I can do a personalized content at scale, but still you are giving that instruction to the AI to actually deliver, right?
Yeah.
It's still coming from you.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of being adaptive, right? And in terms of being flexible and
Yeah.
being prepared for the changes, because I've seen a few examples of people finding it hard to find a job, content writers
Yeah.
specifically. And my thought process usually around that is that if you are a mediocre writer, and we've seen it in job applications. And I think it's interesting that even job applications now have to be tweaked because what are you evaluating, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can't be evaluating just how they're writing because AI can do that for you. ChatGPT can do that for you. But I think I forgot my question. Let me think what my question was. Yeah, my so what I'm trying to get at is when AI can do the work that you are delivering, then you're not adding value, right? So if I, as an employer, can get an article done by AI, which is exactly what you would deliver, then I don't need you,
Right.
right? So how do we? I think what's really differentiating humans from AI is, again, like you said, their creativity, their ability to really, they know what they want from AI as
Yeah.
well, to be able to act. So what are those skills? How are they changing? How do we teach people, and how do people learn for themselves as well, to make sure that they can be AI proof?
I like that, AI proof. So I guess the question should be, what are the redundant tasks on a daily
Yeah.
basis that you need to, I guess, manage, right? And how can you actually delegate that redundant task to the tools, to the AI, right? Because I still see AI as, it's like having your, I guess, not
An
virtual
intern?
assistant, like an intern, but this intern is doing like things that are repetitive. For example,
Right.
like we used to have a note taker when we have meetings, right? This is like back in the day. Now we don't need anyone to do that, because then we have different tools that can actually recap our conversation on the spot and then send out, like bullet points of discussion. Even that, we still need to check, is this the right one,
Yeah.
right? Is this the right summary that we want out of this meeting, right? So I feel like things that are very redundant, or things that are, so basically, for example, I also do content writing, right? And usually it takes me at least 1 or 2 days just to do research on a specific topic or content, right? After that research, then I outline my content, and then after that, then I write it. It takes like 3 days just to do that, right? And then after you write the first draft, it takes you another day to actually, adjusting and finalizing. But with ChatGPT, all the other LLMs right now, you can do that within a day, right? So if you say, hey, I need a blog post for this kind of topic with an angle of this, and this, we can deliver it in one day, not 3 days. So imagine the kind of efficiency that you gain by leveraging this AI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's also, like you said, there's still that one, you mentioned that you still have to tell ChatGPT what that angle is.
Of course.
That you wanted to explore.
Yeah.
But also in terms of ChatGPT hallucinating, right?
Yeah.
It makes up its own facts. It
Yeah.
makes up its own studies and quotes from people and
Yeah.
whatnot. I think research still remains. I think that's also important, I feel, to mention that there's still that skill of research is still extremely important in terms of knowing what you want to look for.
Yeah.
And then obviously the angle that you want to present. And so what are some tips, for instance, that you would give to somebody who wants to use ChatGPT, but still be adding value to that process and not just putting out what ChatGPT is doing? What is additional, or what is the additionality of the person who's using ChatGPT? What value can they be adding to the process?
So, for example, if you're doing research, I'm not going into ChatGPT, right? Because for research, ChatGPT is quite hallucinating even until now.
Yeah.
But what you can use is actually specific AI tools that is for research, like Keymate, or like even Google Gemini now have their own like research tool, meaning like they are taking it from the Google Scholar or Google Scholar page. But again, what you need to do is basically adding your personalized touch and adding like what are the outcomes that you want, and ask ChatGPT to do some other research that is relevant to what you are about to write or what you are about to research, right? So it goes back to you tell ChatGPT to, I need this research about, I don't know, who lands on the moon the first time, right? And then it'll give you like a list of different references, but you still need to check and double check the facts, right?
Yeah.
So again, there's still some human, I would say human involvement in this. It's not like you give it to the tools and that's it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, Finia. It was lovely to have you.
Thanks, Sana.
I think I learned a lot. I still have a lot of questions, but we've run out of time.
Okay.
So maybe off screen.
Yes,
we'll be able to
definitely.
talk about
Definitely.
those. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.